Okay, folks, if you'd like to take your seats, we'll make a start. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming today to Fresh Start Foundation's first roadshow, first of many weeks ahead, travelling to Scotland and finding out what we can do, and David will explain more than that. My name's Stuart. I'm one of the directors here at Fresh Start Foundation. I'll be speaking to you a little bit more later on this afternoon with regards to the situation here in Edinburgh. First of all, we just want to do some housekeeping with you all. If we hear the fire alarms, just exit to the main street, and round the corner to Chamberlain Street is where the fire station point is. If anyone feels a little bit uneasy about what we're talking about today, we do have a counsellor within the vicinity, so if you want to speak to anyone, just find Janine, who is actually just sitting on the telephone outside at the moment, and she'll happily sit down and have a chat with you. Otherwise than that, we'll have a question and answer at the end of the day, so if anyone has questions, please try to keep hold of them there today. We've got David will be speaking to tell you a little bit about Fresh Start Foundation. We're lucky to have Brian Goresh from UK Column, who has done lots within this satanic ritual abuse field. But without further ado, we're running slightly behind time to get started. I'll hand over to David and we will take it from there. Welcome once again.
Is Kat outside? She is she? Just before we start the sort of imparting the sort of ideas of why we're all here, one of our researchers, who's known as Wildcat online, and who many of you will have come across in the virtual world, and who's written and produced a great number of videos about the effects and the history of child abuse in Scotland and in the UK. Kat's got some video and some music we'd like to start off with. So if you're ready, I'll just hand over to Kat for the moment.
Especially the Scottish kind, but Scottish dogs have an inbuilt advantage over Scottish humankind. A wagging tail and a little wet nose can find new love or avoid potential foes. But in this small ancient nation, we gather information in slow ways and worse ways. Some do appraise by using this phrase. What school did you go to? Sounds like, where did you spend your teenage days? But what school did you go to? Does it mean what it says? But that's genius. And in that song Percy sings, sometimes words have two meanings. My God, he didn't know how right he was. Now I know he's a big Rules fan, but does he favour rebel songs or marching flute bands? On the west side of this country, to stop it getting funky, as they extend a hand, you'll see like Kissinger or Talleyrand. What school did you go to? Doesn't mean where did you spend your teenage days? No. What school did you go to? Does it mean what it says? Let's hear it for the dog sniffing, licking, licking, sniffing. Let's hear it for the dog sniffing, licking, licking, sniffing, sniffing, licking, sniffing, some of them ended up in prison. Now when they rerun Top of the Pops, some of the hosts have got the chop. I'm sleeping soundly in my bed, 'cause Jimmy Savile's still dead. The swinging 70s used to sit on celebrities' knees. The 1970s sat on celebrities' knees. Speculation began to roam like MPs through a children's home. How many more? What did they do? Where were the girls and boys in blue? Now the victims and the families have retrospective apologies. They're told that was then, it isn't now. We slaughtered all those sacred cows then. It's here again. There's never been a way, so don't call it a comeback. Happy days of yore are all destroyed. Now it's looking like a sad sack. It's then again. Oh, it's
Well, thanks very much, Kat. I think it's worth noting just how much impact these videos have on the music, and I love the Proclaimers song there at the end. That's fantastic. That's the best anthem about fighting against child abuse that there is out there. So firstly, thank you all very much for coming here today. I thought I'd start by just explaining a little bit about why I'm here and what brought me here. I was following from a distance, as many people do, the campaign run by Robert Greene over the abuse of Holly Gregg. And I'd been supportive, I'd been watching, but I had not been in any way active. And then Robert Greene was lifted from his home in Cheshire by Cheshire Police and Police Scotland. And he was meant to be locked up in a jail in Aberdeenshire. And there'd been a riot, so instead of having a jail in Aberdeenshire, they had a wrecked jail in Aberdeenshire, and he was locked up in Perth. Fairly high security, HMP Perth, with all the murderers. And so I decided to go along and visit him. Now, to do this, you have to give your full ID, they photograph your passport, they know exactly who you are, where you live. And this was a very small statement, but it was for me the Rubicon, because after that you transform from being someone who's watching the fight against child abuse to someone who is in some way involved, where you stand up and say, I'm here, this is also my fight. So it gave me a chance to talk to Robert. I got all the documents, I got all the reports, and I looked at the case. And I started to ask questions. And I was also able to see, and this is where the more the authorities react against people who are simply seeking justice, the more they reveal themselves to be inherently unjust. Robert Greene was held in remand for 96 days, which is 6 days more than the limit. He hadn't at this point had a trial, and the view from the Procurator Fiscal Service, right, and this is the organisation in Scotland that's been called institutionally corrupt, and looks after, apparently, all criminal prosecution in Scotland. The view from the Procurator Fiscal Service is that this gentle campaigner against child abuse was so dangerous that he could not be allowed out. And they kept opposing bail. This is utterly ridiculous, but that's what they did. So we had this round of going around courts trying to get Robert out and watching how the system operates and how alien it was, and how on a good day with the right sheriff you could see justice happening. But it was very obscured by procedure, by language that was alien, and by priorities that were not the priorities of truth and justice. So we did eventually get Robert out. And the reaction when he was released was interesting, because if you've seen the Italian Job, when they get the gold out of the Italian bank, there's a scene in the prison where all the prisoners are on the balconies overlooking the main hall, and they're all cheering. Well, this is what it was like when Robert Greene got out of HMP Perth, because he was a hero in there to the young men who were inside with him, because they knew he was honest, and they knew why he was in. He was in for defending a vulnerable girl. He was in for opposing the cover-up of abuse. They could recognize it. The prison wardens could recognize it. The people in the street can recognize it, but the authorities couldn't. So that was one of the events that led me here. And the second one was the resignation of Susan O'Brien QC, who was the head of the official inquiry. Now, when Robert Greene was taken in to HMP Perth, things looked very bleak. There was no go forward really on justice for child abuse survivors. There was this attack on one of our heroes in this movement, and there didn't seem to be much progress. But during the time he was in, during those 96 days, the scene had transformed, and as more and more revelations became known about Leon Britton, the former Home Secretary, about Saville, about many other people in high places in Westminster, in the security services, and as information such as the abuse at Dolphin Square became known, there was a momentum shift. The public now could actually look at this subject, and there was a demand for some action, and inquiries were set up. So there was optimism. And the inquiry was set up, and there was a panel of 3 people set up to run the Scottish inquiry. So we looked on with interest to see if these people would be honest and determined and independent. And then they all had to resign. Now, this is Susan O'Brien QC's resignation letter. This is on the Scottish Government website, but you know, I couldn't find it on the Scottish Government website using their search engine. No chance. Google found it. And number 2 on the list when you do a Google search on this is Kat's blog describing this. But the Scottish Government website, it is there. It's just not actually findable. So I just want to read a couple of extracts from this, because it is shocking, and it is the reason that we are a people's inquiry and we're entirely independent of government. So this is from Susan O'Brien QC to John Swinney MSP, Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, and the man directly responsible for the child abuse inquiry in Scotland. So she writes, in his letter of resignation dated 27th June 2016, Professor Lamb complained that the inquiry as currently set up is not able to operate in a manner which is properly independent from government. I agree with him. Scottish Government officials have sought to micromanage and control the inquiry, and I have resisted this. What Professor Lamb did not say, but he knew, is that my position as independent chair of this inquiry has been actively undermined by some Scottish Government officials over the past months. One even went so far as to threaten what he called the nuclear option, by which we understood he meant my removal in January 2016 during a dispute about funding for statement taking. A little while later she continues, on May 25, 2015, my fellow panel member, Professor Lamb, made written representations to you, that's Mr. Swinney, to support me, and warned that he thought that Section 12 proceedings seemed to be, quote, predicated on the assumption that the Scottish ministers, rather than the panel, should control the inquiry. End quote. He also warned that the proceedings called into question, quote, the declared necessary independence of the inquiry. Your intervention will thus undermine the legitimacy of this an historically important inquiry. And she concluded, moreover, since you have approached the dismissal of a chair so casually on the basis of misunderstandings and inaccurate allegations about my attitudes and beliefs with regards to survivors of child abuse, I have no confidence that you would not try to dismiss me again another time, even if you decide against dismissal now. This compromises my ability to carry out my duty, to ask questions and reach conclusions fearlessly. In short, I cannot reassure the public that this inquiry will be conducted independently of government. My trust that the Scottish Government will actually respect the independence of the inquiry has gone. You have therefore left me with no alternative but to resign. I do so with a heavy heart, as I am clear that there is a real need for an inquiry to take place. So for those of us who got together to set up an independent people's inquiry, that was the last straw. Now, the background to this was using rumour and innuendo to force out an independent chair of an allegedly independent inquiry. If this country had a heart, John Swinney that would have been the end of his career. That letter should have destroyed John Swinney, because nobody should listen to him. If he is willing to use innuendo to destroy an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, he has forfeited any right to govern anybody. But he continues. So we decided we wanted to do something that was completely independent of government. And we started to assemble it. Now, have you seen the Michael McIntyre sketch called Designing a Scotsman? Right? Here he describes how the basic idea behind Designing a Scotsman is to make it as unlike an Englishman as possible. Right? Now, we've brought an Englishman to illustrate this point, and you'll see him later if you've not seen one before. Now, the idea is the Scotsman went down to England, and it wasn't pretty. You know, they were all wearing grey trousers. And I want to thank Brian for wearing grey trousers today. It makes this joke better. Right? And based on this, we had to all wear multicoloured skirts, because that's as opposite to grey trousers as possible. Right? So I was thinking about this last night and realised that this is how we designed the independent inquiry about child sexual abuse in Scotland. Because the official inquiry has a great number of lawyers. And some of our people went along to the first sitting of the inquiry, and they were astounded, because after 2 hours they all went to lunch and didn't come back. Now, all these lawyers are on very fat salaries, right? Remember the Law Society, right? They all work underneath the Law Society. And the Law Society's motto, as we all know, is invoce ergo sum ego, which means I invoice, therefore I am. So the first thing we decided was anyone involved in Fresh Start Foundation does it voluntarily. There are no salaries. Nobody gets paid for their time. Now, this was a gut feel response, because we are offering to listen to people who have been treated horribly. And part of the service that we do is simply to listen. Right? To listen, to give them an ear, and an ear that will believe the story. And to sit down with someone, we didn't feel we could do that on a basis that we're there benefiting financially. It just felt wrong. So we said, right, nobody gets paid. And that obviously keeps the cost right down. Now, the next stage, well, how do you do that? How do you mobilize the resources? Right? So the next difference is the official inquiry is elite. It's select. It's people who know the right people who are invited to be part of it. People who are in the Law Society or the right club or the right, perhaps, less than completely transparent organisation. So our opposite of that is we're of the people. We want many people to help us. There's 7 of us who are directors of Fresh Start. We will not be able to do this. But if we become hundreds of people committed to this goal of achieving truth and justice, we will. Another difference was the official inquiry was very narrow. The first thing that happened was the terms of reference were only people in institutional residential care. So if you're abused, but you're not resident, you're not sleeping in that organisation's building, then you're not involved in the terms of reference. So immediately, 80%.
I'll put a quick correction there. It wasn't just that you were in residential care, it was a certain amount of organisations with residential care. So if you're in Bernardo's, weren't listening to you. So certain ones who weren't listening to you. So
yes. It's narrow. So it was narrow. So our response to that was, no, it's the broadest possible. If you have suffered child sexual abuse in Scotland by a Scottish organisation, by a Scottish member of the establishment, as broad as possible, we want to hear from you because we want the big picture. Now, at this point, we ran a couple of conferences and we got some speakers along and we started to have a conversation because we were still working out what it is we wanted to do. And that was vital because that showed up a whole series of subsets of this problem. And each one is unique. One speaker explained how the sex industry works and how it ties into this. So what you have is institutional trafficking of young girls and young boys from care institutions into saunas, into prostitution, into rent boy scene. And these people who are enabling this trafficking are still there. They're there now. They're there now in this city, watching for opportunities to say to some young girl who's in a horrible position in a care home, having probably come through some pretty extreme experiences to get there, and is in a place where there might be quite a lot of violence and threat and is afraid. Oh, a pretty girl like you doesn't need to stay here. I'll make a phone call. It'll be okay. And that is I will get you out of here. And there'll be the appearance of care. And the appearance of care will last until the taxi ride at the far end of that phone call. And then the appearance of care ends. So that's one aspect of it. Another one was Satanist ritual abuse. Now, we've taken quite a lot of criticism already because we've been absolutely upfront and clear that Satanist ritual abuse is real, it's happening in this country, and we want to hear from those who have suffered such abuse. We've had to make it explicit because, and here I must thank advice from Wilfred Wong, who's a long campaigner on this subject. It's so often ignored and so often explained away as false memory, or that couldn't possibly happen, or it's just a conspiracy theory, that the survivors of this abuse are so used to being ignored, if you say to them, we're investigating child sexual abuse, they think it doesn't include them. You've actually got to make it explicit, to say, no, it does. So we've done that. Now that's another difference from the official inquiry. So we then got to a point where we could see a way forward. And we wanted to reach out to people. And I should say a few things about the people we need to reach out to, because there are many and varied. Firstly, we need the people who've experienced child abuse, satanic ritual abuse, to speak to us. We want to receive their testimony. We want to understand and record and communicate to the nation what has happened. So this is the first roadshow of 36. And the first principle of this is we are looking to make contact with people. We're looking to show that we're not a flash in the pan. We need to win their confidence. We need to make it clear what we're about and the fact that we are not going to go away, and we will be relentless. But we also need to reach out to many other sorts of people. There are Scottish police officers, some of whom are in contact with us, who have reported cases of child sexual abuse, and then strange things have happened to their careers. It's terminal ground contact for their career if you actually stand up against this. It certainly has been. Our speaker next week is John Wedger, who experienced exactly the same thing in the Met. Now, these people are starting to talk to us, and we're able to take testimony on a variety of levels, including anonymously, where people are simply too frightened that they will be targeted. And please remember what targeted means. If you're a police officer and you speak out about this, right, it's not just a little hassle you get, right? You get put on disciplinary charges inside the police force on strange and bizarre things. You then get accused of often data protection related crimes, because that can end you up in prison. And how do you frighten a police officer? You say you're going to prison, because police officers have a hard time in prison. You cut off their income and their salary so they cannot feed their children or pay their mortgage. And then you come after their children with social services. False accusations. So you say to these people, this is what the establishment does, I will destroy you, and you'll still not get the message out. That's how the intimidation works. But they're starting to speak. These people are starting to talk to us. We need more of them. Another aspect of this is journalists. How many stories are on the spike? A huge number. And they're still going on the spike. Today, there's stories sitting on editors' desks, not being told. And why? Legal intimidation, threats. The story's true. So we want to speak to journalists. We want to understand what they know, what they've not been allowed to say. And then, perhaps most importantly, we need volunteers. We need to become not 7, not 70, at least 700, maybe 7,000 people pushing towards truth and justice for survivors. So the idea is we have these roadshows, and then as we meet people, as we meet people who have suffered this abuse, they tell us the stories, and we make a record of this. It'll be videoed. It'll be an interview, but it'll be an interview not like a police interview. It'll be an interview with someone listening and allowing these people to tell their stories so we can record what's happened. We'll take all of that information and we'll produce something which will go back to the nation. We'll say, this is what we've discovered. Now, this is not information that's tested in court, and it has to be, some of it will be anonymized because of that, but we'll still be able to communicate in the way that Solzhenitsyn communicated what had happened in the gulags, by taking a whole series of stories from a whole series of people who have suffered horribly and telling their story. We will tell that story. Now, beyond that, we're looking to use the common law, because not only have our politicians failed us, but the police and the entire judiciary and legal system have failed us. The Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service in this country has been called by senior QCs institutionally corrupt. They are a complete blockage. They decide who gets prosecuted. The Lord Advocate in this country decides who gets prosecuted, who does not. That system being institutionally corrupt, if evil captures that system, the whole country is lost, because there's no alternative. So we're having to create an alternative. We cannot trust these people. So we're standing on our common law rights, and we're standing together as a people to seek justice. Now, this means that if we have two witnesses coming forward, they don't know one another, and there's no link, and they identify, by two people a thing is established, and they identify a perpetrator, we will investigate those cases thoroughly as we possibly can. And if we feel that there's a solid case to answer, we'll call a grand jury of ordinary people, and we'll ask them whether this person should be indicted. And we'll start the process off that way. Because we cannot go to the police and to the Crown Office and say, please give us justice. Because we've been there before and there is no justice. Or, it's not that there's no justice, justice is extremely unreliable and random and sometimes bizarre. And that's not the way I've seen grand juries at work. They're extremely sensible. The standard of examination that you get from 15 or 20 ordinary citizens looking at a problem is astounding. And it's a system that, frankly, I have much more confidence in than the current system. So that's where we're going to go. We will be relentless. We will approach this with compassion and love. And we will seek truth and we will seek justice. And I hope you all join us in that fight. Thank you very much.